I used to believe con artists looked a certain way. I thought they were loud, flashy, desperate, the kind of people you instinctively kept your purse a little closer around. I was wrong. The most dangerous con artists I ever met wore tailored suits, opened car doors, remembered my coffee order after hearing it once, and made every person in the room believe they were the most important one there, especially me. When I met Mark, I was 34 years old and convinced I had already missed my chance at the kind of love people write books about. I had a steady career in human resources, a small townhouse I was still paying off, and enough failed relationships to stop believing in fairy tales. Then Mark walked into my life. We met at a charity fundraiser through mutual friends. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. He was the one quietly making everyone else feel heard. When he spoke to me, he wasn't scanning the room looking for someone more interesting. He looked directly at me, listened to every word, and somehow remembered details I'd forgotten I'd even mentioned. A week later, he surprised me with tickets to an art exhibit after remembering I'd casually mentioned wanting to go months earlier. 2 weeks after that, he brought flowers to my office. Not roses, but my favorite lilies. I had only mentioned they reminded me of my grandmother once. It felt thoughtful. Everything about him felt effortless. Looking back, I realized he wasn't simply listening. He was remembering everything. Mark owned a growing logistics company that handled commercial freight across the United States and Canada. He worked hard, traveled often, and somehow still made me feel like I was the center of his world. My friends teased me. Nobody's this perfect. I'd laugh. Maybe I just got lucky. Looking back, I wasn't lucky. I was exactly the person he was looking for. 6 months after our first date, everyone around us was telling us to slow down. Mark never argued with them. He simply proposed. Not at a crowded restaurant, not on a beach, just the two of us sitting on the back deck of my townhouse after dinner. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box, and smiled. "I've spent my whole life making business decisions," he said. "This is the easiest decision I've ever made." I laughed because it sounded impossibly fast. I don't even know what to say. "You don't have to answer tonight." He closed the box. "I'll wait as long as you need." Then he changed the subject. He didn't pressure me. He didn't argue. He made me feel completely free to choose. 3 days later, I called him crying, and I said yes. Every person in my life told me we were moving too quickly. My sister asked if I really knew him. My mother suggested we wait another year. Mark never criticized them. He simply smiled and said, "They're trying to protect someone they love." I respect that. He never tried to separate me from my family. He never raised his voice. He never gave anyone a reason to distrust him, which made me trust him even more. We were married 10 months after we met. Standing at the altar, looking into his eyes, I remember thinking one thing: how did I get so lucky? Marriage suited us better than either of us expected. People always talk about the first year being the hardest. For us, it felt effortless. About a year after we got married, we sold my townhouse and bought a larger home together. I still remember standing in the empty living room the day we got the keys. We had folding chairs because our furniture hadn't arrived yet, pizza boxes on the floor, a bottle of cheap champagne. Mark wrapped his arms around me and smiled. "This isn't just a house. It's the beginning of everything we're going to build together." At the time, I believed every word. His logistics company kept growing, and before long, he was talking about partnerships, new ventures, and businesses I barely understood. Every few months, there seemed to be another milestone, a new warehouse, more employees, more contracts. I loved watching him succeed because he never acted as though any of it belonged to him alone. Whenever someone congratulated him, he'd smile and say, "It's not my success, it's ours." I can't explain how much those words meant to me. They made me feel like we were building something together. Mark worked long hours, but he never brought work home. If he walked through the front door carrying his laptop, he'd leave it by the entrance before coming to find me. "Work can wait," he'd always say. "My wife comes first." It was such a small habit, one I appreciated more than I ever told him. Running a growing company came with interruptions. His phone rang during dinner. Couriers occasionally stopped by the house. Sometimes he'd disappear into his office for a few minutes before joining me again. "Crisis averted," he'd joke with a smile. Work stayed in his world. Home stayed in ours. And I liked it that way. I had my own career. He had his. That balance worked for us. Every few months, he'd leave a folder on the kitchen counter before heading back to the office. "I need your signature for our home insurance before I forget," he'd say. By the time I'd finished my coffee, it would already be gone. I couldn't have told you the exact details inside even if you'd asked. Every now and then, he'd interrupt whatever we were doing. We'd be halfway through a movie, packing for a vacation, walking out the front door. He'd smile and say, "Before I forget, I need you to sign something for the remortgage." I'd stop for a moment. Then we'd carry on with our day. Those interruptions never lasted long enough to become memories. What I remembered were the vacations, the birthdays, Sunday mornings drinking coffee on the back deck, the ordinary things that make a marriage feel safe. By our 5th anniversary, I genuinely believed I'd married the kindest man I'd ever known. My friends adored him. My family trusted him. Even my father, who had never approved of any man I dated, pulled me aside one Christmas and said, "If anything ever happened to you, I'd trust Mark to look after this family." That sentence stayed with me. Because my father didn't trust easily. Neither did I. Or at least, I didn't think I did. 8 years after we met, our life looked exactly the way we'd always imagined. A beautiful home, successful careers, financial security, a marriage everyone envied. If someone had knocked on my door that week and told me my husband was living a double life, I would have laughed. Not because I thought our marriage was perfect. No marriage is. But because I believed I knew the man sleeping beside me. I knew his smile, his habits, his dreams, or at least I thought I did. I had no idea the life I was so proud of had been carefully designed from the very beginning. 8 years. That's how long it took for everything Mark and I built to collapse. The morning it happened felt completely ordinary. As usual, he left before I did. He kissed me goodbye, told me he'd probably be working late. Then he smiled and said, "I'll make it up to you this weekend." Those were the last loving words my husband ever said to me. About an hour after I arrived at work, my phone rang. Unknown number. When I answered, a calm voice asked, "Is this Rebecca Fields?" "Yes." "This is Detective Harris with the Organized Crime Unit." My stomach dropped. For one terrifying second, I thought something had happened to Mark. Instead, he asked, "Are you currently at your residence?" "No." "I'm at work." "Please return to your residence immediately." Before I could ask why, the call ended. I drove home expecting to answer questions about my husband. Instead, I couldn't even get onto my street. Police cruisers, unmarked SUVs, news vans, yellow tape stretched across my front lawn. Neighbors stood silently on the sidewalk watching. Some were filming. I stepped out of my car. An officer immediately walked toward me. "Ma'am, you need to stay back." I live here. Within seconds, two detectives approached. One looked at a photograph, then back at me. Rebecca Fields? Yes. He nodded once. Without another word, he turned me around. You're under arrest. Cold steel snapped around my wrists. I froze. What are you doing? There has to be some mistake. No one answered. As they escorted me toward a police vehicle, I caught a glimpse through my open front door. Officers carried computers, files, and boxes out of my house as though they'd rehearsed it 100 times. My neighbors watched silently as everything I'd spent 8 years building disappeared in under 10 minutes. Nothing about it felt real. I kept searching the crowd, looking for Mark. He had to be there somewhere. He'd explain everything. I asked the policeman, "Where's my husband?" No one answered. I called him as they placed me in the back of the police vehicle, straight to voicemail. Again, nothing. I kept telling myself the same thing. They've arrested the wrong person. Once they find Mark, he'll sort it out, and this will all be over. Several hours later, I was taken into an interview room. No windows, one table, 3 chairs, a bottle of water. They left me alone long enough for panic to become exhaustion. Eventually, Detective Harris walked in carrying several thick binders. He sat across from me. No anger, no accusations. Then he opened the first binder and pushed it toward me. "Please look at the first page." I frowned. It was a company registration, a business I'd never heard of. Then I looked lower. Director, Rebecca Fields. I looked up. There has to be another Rebecca Fields. He said nothing. Instead, he turned the page. Another company, another registration, another signature. Mine. Another page, different company, different address, same signature. Mine. He kept turning pages. Construction, transportation, imports, warehousing, vehicle leasing. Every company ended exactly the same way. Rebecca Fields, Rebecca Fields, Rebecca Fields. My breathing became shallow. I don't remember any of this. He quietly slid another binder toward me. Bank authorizations, loan approvals, commercial leases, import permits, every one bearing my signature. I stared at my own handwriting. It was mine, every single one. Detective Harris finally spoke. "They all belong to you." "I know the signatures are mine," I said. "I just don't understand how." He opened another file. "Do you remember signing these?" he asked. I searched my memory. Mark asked me to sign paperwork from time to time. Mortgage documents, home insurance, life insurance, refinancing. I thought they were the ordinary things married couples signed. He looked at me for a long moment. "Did you read them?" "Sometimes," I swallowed. "Most of the time, no." He nodded once. "We've identified more than 10 companies connected to this investigation." He turned another page. "Every single one lists you as the owner or director." He paused, then quietly said, "Your husband doesn't appear on a single one." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Legally, none of this belongs to him," he said. I stared at him. "I don't understand." He opened the last binder. Unlike the others, this one wasn't filled with signatures. It was a summary. He turned it toward me. At the bottom of the page, one number stared back at me. Estimated criminal proceeds, $184.7 million. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was impossible. There has to be a mistake. He didn't answer. Instead, he quietly said, "According to the records we've recovered, every company that generated those proceeds belongs to you." I couldn't even process a number that large. $184 million. It wasn't until the weeks that followed that I finally understood what Mark had built. The logistics company I'd been so proud of had only been the front. Behind it sat dozens of shell companies. Most existed only on paper. Others operated warehouses that barely stored anything at all. Shipping manifests were altered. Cargo containers were switched. Luxury vehicles were stolen, stripped of their identities, and exported overseas. Illegal gambling profits were disguised as legitimate business income. Drug money moved through fake invoices, consulting contracts, and freight payments. Every layer hid the one beneath it. Every company billed another. Every account transferred money to the next, until dirty money looked clean. Every business listed exactly the same owner, Rebecca Fields. By the time investigators finished tracing it all, they believed the network had generated more than $184 million. On paper, I hadn't just signed a few documents. I had signed an entire criminal empire into existence. I began to remember every rushed morning, every interrupted dinner, every quiet before I forget, every folder that appeared for a few seconds, then disappeared just as quickly. I looked back at the binders. I wasn't looking at paperwork. I was looking at 8 years of my marriage. Every page told the same story, not about the business, about me. I finally asked the question I'd been avoiding since the handcuffs clicked around my wrists. Where's Mark? Detective Harris reached into the folder beside him. He placed a single photograph on the table. Mark, walking through an airport terminal, one suitcase, passport in hand. The timestamp showed it had been taken that morning. I stared at it, then shook my head. No. He kissed me goodbye before leaving for work this morning. The detective didn't respond. He gathered the binders, walked toward the door. As he reached it, he stopped without turning around. He didn't go to work this morning, Mrs. Fields. He went to the airport. The door closed. Only then did I understand. Mark hadn't just planned his escape. He had spent 8 years building the perfect person to take the fall. By the time they formally charged me, I already knew the truth. Legally, every piece of it belonged to me. It didn't matter that I'd never run those businesses. It didn't matter that I had never laundered $1, or imported a shipment, or stolen a vehicle. The law wasn't looking at what I believed. It was looking at what I had signed. The months that followed became a blur of lawyers, court dates, and evidence. Every time I walked into the courtroom believing someone would finally understand that I'd been manipulated, that I had never knowingly helped build a criminal organization. Instead, the prosecution never tried to prove what I knew. They only had to prove what they could see in the evidence. Corporate records, commercial leases, import permits, bank authorizations. Every single document ended exactly the same way. Rebecca Fields. My lawyer argued that I had trusted my husband. The prosecutor stood, walked slowly toward the jury, then quietly said, "Trust is not a legal defense." The courtroom fell silent. I looked at the 12 strangers whose job it was to decide the rest of my life. For the first time, I knew they weren't looking at a victim. They were looking at a woman whose name appeared on every company that mattered. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury only needed 5 hours. Guilty. Participation in a criminal organization, money laundering, fraud, conspiracy. The judge spoke for almost half an hour before announcing my sentence. I don't remember most of what he said. I only remember the last 2 words. 18 years. I let out a cry. The courtroom disappeared around me. My legs gave way beneath me. As the officers pulled me to my feet, I looked around the gallery one last time. Not because I believed Mark would suddenly appear, because some small, foolish part of me still wanted him to. He never came. He had built exactly what he wanted, a criminal empire, and the perfect person to leave behind when it finally collapsed. Prison changes you. Not all at once. One day you simply stop counting. The weeks become months. The months become years. Eventually, you stop thinking about the life you lost, because it isn't coming back. I stopped trying to convince people that I was innocent. The courts had already decided who I was. On paper, they were right. For years, I lived with one question. Why? Not how, not when, just why. 10 years after my conviction, my lawyer came to see me. I found him, he said. For a brief moment, I couldn't breathe. He agreed to see you. After all those years, my lawyer located Mark Fields, and he had agreed to see me. I sat in the visitation room. It looked exactly like every other room in that prison. Gray walls, metal chairs, glass separating two people who once promised to spend their lives together. I spent years imagining this moment. I thought I'd be angry. Instead, I was terrified. The door opened. Mark walked in, older, a few strands of gray at his temples, still wearing tailored suits, still carrying himself like the world belonged to him. He looked comfortable. He picked up the phone. "So," he smiled. "It's been a while," he said. I just sat there and stared at him. This was the man I had trusted with my life, the man whose last kiss had sent me to prison. Finally, I whispered, "Why, Mark?" He leaned back in his chair. "I wondered if that would be your first question," he said, smugly. Tears blurred my vision. "I gave you everything. My love, my life, my trust. How could you do this to me?" He answered immediately, without hesitation, without emotion. "You weren't my wife. You were my insurance policy." The words hit harder than the judge's sentence ever had. Every anniversary, every birthday, every promise, every "I love you," reduced to one sentence. "Was any of it real?" I whispered. He looked at me almost curiously. "Depends what you mean." "The paperwork was." Then he gave a faint smile. Something inside me finally broke. Not my heart. That had happened years ago. It was the last part of me that still believed there had once been a good man hiding somewhere inside him. There wasn't. There never had been. An officer announced that visiting time was over. Mark stood up to leave. I waited. Maybe for one last apology, one last lie, one last explanation. Instead, he adjusted the cuff of his jacket, looked at me one final time, then walked away. He never even looked back. The door closed behind him. That was the last time I ever saw my husband. People always ask me how I could have trusted him so easily. They imagine one lie, one signature, one terrible decision. That's not how people like Mark destroy lives. They do it one ordinary day at a time. One promise, one smile, one, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Until one day, you realize they were never asking for your trust. They were teaching you to give it away. And by then, your name is already on everything.